Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the International Peace Institute, I'm pleased to welcome you all to the launch of the new OCHA report, Humanitarianism in the Network Age, How New Communication Technologies Are Transforming Humanitarian Aid. We would like to thank the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs for choosing IPI to present this new groundbreaking report to the New York community. And of course, I would like to thank the panelists for being with us today. I meant to say groundbreaking because this report is really the first of its kind. It's an outstanding cross-disciplinary study that aims to capture the potential and the impact that new information and communication technology can have on humanitarian relief. New technology will profoundly affect the delivery of humanitarian aid, not least creating a fundamental shift in power from capital and headquarters to the field and the people that aid agencies aim to assist, the report conclusions suggest. The report is also laudable for its realistic approach to the topic. In other words, the report is aware that new technology is no panacea to the many shortcomings of humanitarian response capacity. Much will depend on our institutions to build the capacity to use this information to improve decision-making and operations. But much will also depend on the technological education of those who need help and the quality of the information humanitarian workers will receive. And partnership, of course, will be essential, particularly with the private sector, to take full advantage of the potential of new information and communication technology. These, of course, are challenges that we see in many other fields. IPI has just published a report on the role of new technology in the prevention of violence and conflict, and copies are available at the entrance, and many of its conclusions are consistent with the new OCHA's reports. Now, before introducing our speakers today, I also would like to thank the authors of the OCHA report, who I think have done an excellent job in distilling a large amount of information in a clear and forward-looking document. So thanks to the author Rahul Chandran and the team, Andrew Tow, I know I worked hard on the data section, and the editors Daniel Gilman and Andrew Noyes. Congratulations for the excellent job. We have 5 speakers today, so we have to be quite rigorous on the time. I will ask them to speak for roughly 8 minutes, and then we will move to the floor. I will introduce them. 4 of them have PowerPoint, so the panel will move down to the floor. And we start with Ms. Gui Whipson, who is the director of OCHA Corporate Program Division. We will have then Ms. Anawi Alia Yakuchi, who is the head of innovation at Internews, followed by Mr. John Mossotti, the technical advisor at the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Kenya to the United Nations, who is replacing the Deputy Ambassador, who apologized for not being able to join us today. Ms. Desiree Mattel-Anderson will be next, Chief Innovation Advisor at the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency. And finally, Mr. Nathaniel Raymond, Director of the Signal Program on Human Security and Technology at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. Now, we look forward to your insights. We also want to let you know that we are webcasting live. We, of course, ask you to silence your cell phone, but you don't have to turn them off. We actually hope that you will tweet during the event. If you do so, please use the hashtags HINA or IPINST, IPINST. During the Q&A, we will select a few questions for our panelists coming from our Twitter followers. So you are encouraged to ask questions via Twitter as well.
Thank you very much for coming today. And I welcome you to the launching event of our new flagship report, Humanitarianism in the Network Age. So why are we here today? Take a look at these figures. 3.3 billion smartphone subscriptions, 9.3 billion mobile phone subscriptions. According to Ericsson, this is the world in just 5 years, with the majority of those in the developing world. And this growth is not just about calls and texts. Smartphone is expected to account for up to 40% of all handsets sold in Africa. So why should the humanitarians care? I want to introduce you to this lady, and it's blank. Her name is Kasi Pajarillo. She's 27 years old and she lives in Manila. On the evening of August 6, 2012, Kasi was one of thousands struggling to cope with the flash floods in her hometown of Manila. Her physically disabled grandmother was trapped by the rising waters. To find help, Kasi sent this tweet, as you see on the screen, using the hashtag designated by the government for this emergency, rescue. Kasi was emblematic of the vision presented by this report, of increasingly informed, connected, and self-reliant communities, of information movement that is real-time and many-to-many, of new humanitarian actors and new paradigms of response in which international humanitarian actors need to redefine their role. The fundamental change is this: the use of technology in crisis is being driven ultimately by one particular group, the affected people themselves and their use of technology. For them, a phone is not a toy. It helps them run businesses and tap into diaspora networks. It is a radio, a camera, a source of income, a way onto the internet, and for increasing numbers, it is a mobile bank. And they are prioritizing accordingly. Yes, the digital divide exists and country profiles vary enormously, but this is changing daily. Secondly, intertwined with the explosion in mobile phone use is the popularity of social media and online information sharing. As this graphic of social media use in Asia shows, the developing world is increasingly leading this growth. Kasi's hometown, Manila, for instance, sends more SMSs per day than anywhere else in the world. You can see the trends of the Facebook. Thirdly, information now moves simultaneously from many to many, and this includes in disasters. Communication as one-way delivery is increasingly unacceptable. People with these systems expect interaction, response, and the capacity to engage. These processes also are generating massive digital trails, big data, that are gold mines of information about behavior, priorities, even the worldview of participants. Why? Because these networks are social. They are based on existing communities and trust systems. Of course, these networks have always been there, but technology has made them more visible, more powerful, farther reaching, and more complex. Disaster survivors can now reach not only each other, but friends, family, and support networks across the globe in just seconds. They can use these networks to share information, organize ad hoc assistance, transfer money, and broadcast their experiences. Technology is central to community response, which means it is also central to resilience. Information environments are in turn also more complex and increasingly multimedia, mixing high and low tech according to habit and cultural preferences as much as availability. A piece of news might move from Twitter to a reporter who broadcasts on a local radio to audience members who then share with friends and family. In the Dadaab camp, for example, over 90% of long-term residents still prefer radio as an information source, although 20% also have access to mobile telephones. For humanitarians, these present ever-growing opportunities and challenges. So how can we adapt? Our report have identified 4 key recommendations that I would like to bring your attention to. The first and possibly most important recommendation is to recognize information and communication as basic needs in humanitarian response. We had quite a number of debates about this particular point as to whether or not communication and information is a basic right or need. I think you will appreciate there's quite a bit of political sensitivity about treatment of that as a fundamental right. So we actually did end up having treating this as a need, but I think the debate needs to continue, and I hope that you will actually help provoke this debate and discussions. There can no longer be any doubt that communication is a humanitarian imperative. The communities we seek to serve are teaching us this. Take a look at these images. The bottom left was taken in Haiti after the earthquake. The one on the right in the Philippines. And the third one is the downtown New York following Hurricane Sandy. The message is very clear. Wherever you are, your priority in an emergency is to connect, to find help, to tell someone that you're okay, and to find out how the family is. This was so important to Haitians after the earthquake that the going rate to use the phone charging service was $1. And $1 for them is a day's income in Port-au-Prince. In a disaster, everyone has questions. What just happened? Is my family safe? Where can I go? A survivor's capacity to organize their own response depends on the information on which they base decisions. The message from affected communities is clear. The information and communication, the process by which information is shared, must be regarded as a form of critical assistance. Two particularly important points to note here. Firstly, for many of those affected, the capacity to communicate means with each other, not necessarily always with the international responders. We need to think about restoring and supporting ICT infrastructure as a humanitarian service in preparedness and also in response. Secondly, survivors have a dramatically increased ability to speak for themselves and to use communications networks, as Kasi did, that you saw in the very first slide, to source the help they need. Feedback, commentary, and demand-driven information systems, all these are hallmarks of the network age, and we need to plan for practical delivery on all of them. Our second major recommendation is that in crisis, to make sure the information is freely shared and accessible to all who need it to inform decision-making. Part of our key remit as OCHA is to handle information management, and it is a massive task. Humanitarians still rely on written reports and too frequently carry out parallel data collection processes. Too much humanitarian data is simply not shared while it's in inaccessible formats. This needs to change. Imagine instead a system like the Kenya Open Data Initiative, an online database presenting data sets on health, water, sanitation, and energy, among other things, for analysis by anyone and everyone who is interested. Users can create interactive charts and tables or download data for their own use. This map leads me to our third recommendation, which is that if aid agencies are to get better at making use of new data sources and information sharing models, they need to improve their technical capacity. The real-time, many-to-many information models of the network age pose fundamentally new challenges, as does the phenomenon of big data. The sheer volume of information only outscaled by the potential uses to which it can be put. This map is just one example of what new paradigms of humanitarian information are becoming possible. This shows damage caused by Typhoon Bopha late last year in Mindanao in the Philippines, where bridges are down and houses are flooded, all captured by survivors through photos and videos on phones and uploaded to social media. This map was possible because OCHA has developed a digital humanitarian network, a global affiliation of volunteer groups in the technical sector who are prepared to donate their time and considerable expertise to help our work. It includes people who know how to organize crowdsourcing, interpret satellite imagery, verify incoming information from survivors, and a myriad of other tools that we are only beginning to understand. The digital humanitarian network turned this around in 36 hours before the storm had even left Philippines waters. The government also had interactive crisis maps, including details of available evacuation shelters, embedded in official websites days before Typhoon Bopha hit last December. So we are witnessing a lot of new actors, new technology, new models of information sharing and collection. But opportunities, of course, also bring challenges. This brings us to our final recommendation, to ensure that information is used in an ethical and secure manner. Data is never neutral. It reflects political, cultural, socioeconomic biases, particularly at the community level. It can and will be manipulated, mishandled. Both information and communication can be lethally dangerous. We have to also recognize that information tools are not just used for observing conflicts. They are an intrinsic part of the battlefield. We have to ensure privacy and take steps to make sure that information is always used in line with humanitarian principles, and a fine balance between open data and safe data. This is also something we need to do with the private sector, who generate and manage so much of information in question and the channels through which it moves. This report that you have has been put together over several months by a range of experts from both inside and outside OCHA. They were unanimous in their view that communication technology is changing the world and the behavior of people. The vision that it presents of a global, interconnected world in which disaster survivors are at the core, not just of efforts to respond, but to report, analyze, and comment on events, is one we must embrace. The partners this vision sees as taking center stage, the volunteer tech communities, private sector, both international and local, diaspora groups and government, are those we must reach out to and support in their humanitarian endeavors. And the ultimate shift of power envisaged from large institutions to communities is one we must adapt to and indeed champion. So what happened to Cassie? Well, her tweet was spotted by the daughter of a congresswoman who called her and said a military team was nearby organizing rescues and her details had been passed on. A team was dispatched and her grandmother was rescued. In response, Cassie took a photo of the rescue on her phone and tweeted this message to thank who came to help. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Before I start my presentation, I would like to say two things. One is to thank you, OCHA, for inviting me here. But the second one is really, I know that people have been talking about it. I really, truly believe this report is a revolution in the way we're looking at the humanitarian field. If you and OCHA and the rest of the humanitarian community will be able to take the recommendation in this report and make it real and go beyond the piece of paper, then really we're going to look at a complete change and shift in the way we're looking at affected communities, but also in the way we're looking at the way we work as humanitarian community. Now, today I'm actually wearing two hats. One is as a co-founder and board of advisor of the Standby Task Force, which is a group of digital volunteers that support humanitarian organizations during crisis. The other one as senior innovation advisor for Internews, which is an organization that does media development and has been working with affected communities to provide meaningful information during crisis for over 30 years. 3 years ago, I was a student at Columbia University here in New York. And I was graduating and studying humanitarian affairs. I wanted to graduate and go to Pakistan or to Somalia and do my work. And the day of the Chile earthquake, I was listening at a presentation from Patrick Mayer, which is actually here, that was talking about how students at Tufts University were using technology to support humanitarian operations on the ground. And I was a student, I was studying, I had exams and classes, and I said, well, I want to do something. I can't go to Chile, but I want to do something, I want to help. And so in 48 hours, we gathered 200 students in the basement of Columbia University, and we started gathering information from online sources and plot them on an online map. We wanted to help the humanitarian community and the responders on the ground. When we went to them and we said, listen, we have all this great data and we would like you to use it, they said, sorry, we're really busy. We're doing our work here, goodbye. Then Pakistan happened, exactly the same thing. A local organization in Pakistan from Pakistanis on the ground started processing information online, put them on a map, and trying to provide support to humanitarian organizations. When we went to humanitarian organizations working on the ground, we actually two answers. One was, we're really busy, thank you very much. And the second one was, this is really dangerous, what the hell are you doing? So we started thinking about it, and we said, well, how about, first of all, we start learning how the humanitarian community is working and what they actually need. And second, how about we start educating all these people online that go out and start tweeting and Facebook and blogging when there is an emergency and don't know exactly what they're doing, and sometimes they can do something dangerous. And so we created a standby task force. The idea was to get volunteers online together to provide a sort of formal interface for the humanitarian community to be able to actually interact with the crowd. One of the first projects that we ended up doing was actually in collaboration with UN OCHA. And it was the Libya crisis, and someone in the Geneva office from UN OCHA contacted a standby task force and said, we have almost no idea about what is going on the ground. We have no presence because of security reasons. We need someone to help us out, filtering the information that are coming from Libya and from the diaspora and trying to understand what is going on. And so around 300 volunteers gathered online and started processing information coming from blogs, newspaper, online TV, Twitter, Facebook, comments on other newspaper, listening to the radio from Libya and filtering this information and putting them online. In the first month of this work, we processed more than 1,300 different reports that OCHA was using to try to understand the situation on the ground. A second project, that it's the most recent one, and you've just heard a little bit about it, was during the Typhoon Pablo in the Philippines. What is very interesting to me about this project is the fact that at this time, and it was kind of very recent, it was not just about volunteers online, but it was a bunch of different partners that came together, and we started using microtasking tools and different type of algorithm that will automatically filter information coming from social media so that the volunteers could process 20,000 different videos and photos coming from the Philippines to be able to deliver to OCHA only that 138 that were relevant to their work. So what I want to say is that the crowd is there. It would always be there. We can ignore it, we cannot listen, but it's still going to be there. People are still going to go online when there is an emergency, and they're going to try to connect and to help other people. And one of the things that struck me about when I was reading this report was this graphic that says more data is not the right answer. And on one side, I said, yes, I agree. More data is not the right answer. If you dump a lot of data on someone that needs to make a decision, this is not necessarily going to help. The issue is we have more data. It's out there. There's nothing we can do about it. We cannot ignore it. We cannot say this is not a solution, I'm not going to listen to it. The data is out there, and to be honest, people working with big data have always been there. Corporations have been working with big data for years. Inside the UN, there is the UN Global Pulse that is doing amazing analysis and amazing work, trying to understand how can you take an outrageous amount of data and make a sense out of it. This is not something new at all. So it's something that we need to start using, and we need to start learning from people that are already doing it. So the issue then is, okay, we have a lot of data and we have the means to look at this data, but are we actually listening? Is there anyone there that is listening about what is coming out of it? And this is one project that Internews has done in Dadaab in 2011. What we did is that we went down there and we said, okay, this is one of the biggest refugee camps, actually 5 different refugee camps. And there's tons of people there. Kenya has very much a very high level of availability of technology. The entire camps are all covered with mobile network. So let's go there and let's start to see if the humanitarian community is really listening to people. And what we found out was that they're actually not. Not just they're not listening, but they are perceived by the communities as making decisions about their life without involving them. So 2 months ago, I went back to Dadaab, and I did exactly the same assessment. I said, okay, it's 2 years later. Let me see if in 2 years, after we released the first report, something has changed. And the result is no, it hasn't changed. The humanitarian community, it's still not listening. We're still not involving who are supposed to be our beneficiaries into the discussion about what we're doing. So Internews has been working on this issue for a very long time. And this is a project we have actually done, again, in collaboration with UN OCHA in Central African Republic. And what we've done is that we figured out that the humanitarian community had 2 big main issues that they were talking about when talking about using crowdsourcing for emergency. One was, we don't know if the data is true or not, reliability, we want the data to be verified. The second one is, we don't want to be overwhelmed. If we're going to start asking people what they think about what we're doing, we're going to get tons and tons of messages and requests, and we don't have the capacity to answer to that. So what we did is that, okay, you don't have the capacity to do that. How about you use a filter? And the filter is the local media. And the reason why the filter can be the local media is because local media are on the ground, they know the community, and in a lot of places, they are the only information system that remain there even during an emergency. The electricity can go down and the mobile network can go down. 99% of the time, the first service to be restored is the radio. Sometimes it's also the only service that remain in place, like it happened in Haiti. So one of the things that we learn in this project in Central African Republic, but we've learned a lot, is that when we are talking about the network age and new technologies, there is this kind of battle to try to find the perfect tool or the perfect technology. It does not exist. If we want to be able to listen to people and to incorporate all the voices and to connect to other people, we need to start thinking that every single node of this network is connected to the other one in a different way. If we want to be able to have a conversation, we need to use all those tools. We need to go from the blackboard in the market to the crisis map online, to the mobile phone, to listeners group. Everything can be used and needs to be integrated in the system and into the way we operate. Internews has just released a report, which is called Connecting the Last Mile, looking at the role of communication in the Japan earthquake. And it was very interesting because some of the insight that came out of this report are actually that when the entire infrastructure collapsed, people go back to the basics. And the basic as the social network. And when I talk about the social network, I'm not talking about the technology, I'm talking about the people. And they also go back to something very important, which is the basic technology, radio station, printed newspaper. In the Japan earthquake, at a certain point, someone was writing by hand a newspaper and distributing it around because it was the only way to get people information. Not only that, there are a lot of new actors in this space. There is the private sector, there are volunteer technical communities like the Standby Task Force, there are research institutions. There are a lot of new actors that today are doing something during emergency and are playing a role. If we, and if especially you and OCHA and the UN want to change this, want to change the entire system, they need to start talking with these people and incorporating them into their system. So all in all, it's really not about giving people a voice because actually they have it already. We don't have a choice to give it to them or not. And it's also not about the technology. Technology will always change. There will be new technologies tomorrow. The real issue is about the people. The interaction in between people is what we have to look at. Study the information ecosystem that already exists in one place when there is an emergency, and then use that ecosystem to be able to communicate and incorporate people into the way we make decisions. It's fascinating. This report says at one point that information saved lives, and then I think it was a bit of a schizophrenia, and then it said, no, maybe not. Information does save life. We have been saying this for years. You can have water and food and blankets. If you don't know where they are, it's absolutely useless. I want to tell you one single story. When we did an assessment in Tunisia after the Libya crisis, where refugees were running away from Libya and staying at the border with Tunisia, the humanitarian community organized buses to go and get refugees there. And the problem was that the bus was coming from Tunisia on the only road that was going to Libya. A lot of the refugees, when they saw the bus coming, they started running away because the bus was going towards Libya and they thought that the bus was just picking them up and bringing them back into Libya. The way we solved this problem was by printing a piece of paper that we distributed at the border by saying, it's fine, the bus is going to come to pick you up and bring you to a refugee camp in Tunisia. A very single, small piece of information that can make the difference. So I want to leave you with 3 points on moving forward. Security, privacy, and protection. We need to talk about it, and I'm sure that someone here in the panel will do that, especially in terms of security and privacy. Technology brings a lot of problems with it, and we need to be able to address those problems before something bad happens. Creating new processes and new ways to work with new actors in this space. Research, investigate, and question. As of today, there is no hard data about the real impact of using new technologies and new methodologies in the humanitarian field. We need that. We need to research. We need to put the data on a piece of paper. We need to understand what is really happening. Listen. So for me, the choice is very simple. The issue is that you really have no choice. You have to embrace this. Change is always painful. That's what it is. I want to leave you with one last question. which is, with all that is happening, with the fact that technology is enabling people to talk for themselves and help each other, I think that the question that the humanitarian world needs to ask to itself is, will there still be humanitarians in the network age? Will there still be a need for the humanitarian community to be there? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naomi. And now our third speaker, Mr. John Mozotti, Technical Advisor at the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Kenya to the United Nations. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, OCHA. Thank you very much, IPI. I do join other speakers in thanking OCHA for this wonderful report. Obviously, it's very important that the humanitarians also get engaged on the network age. It's absolutely important. Now, the two previous speakers have given the overview of how information, how networking is important when it comes to humanitarianism, and my duty is to transition right into giving a Kenyan case example, and I'll probably start from where the other speakers had left. In about 2010, 2011, the government came up with this idea of opening up data, opening up information to people. And at the launch of the ODI, which is the Open Data Initiative, the Kenya Open Data Initiative, by the President of Kenya, he did mention that this was an issue of governance. Being able to provide that information to the general public and to everybody, it is an issue of governance, it's an issue of transparency, it's an issue of making sure that everybody knows where information is that is needed. So the concept of Open Data Initiative, which is the first of its kind in the developing world, there are certainly very few countries that have this kind of information where every single information relating to government is given out there for people to consume. And it can be used, redistributed, you can reuse it. It certainly just heralds into a new era of information. Now, this information, as you probably saw the slide by the slide that was previously shown by Gui, the information is available in a single portal. It was supported by several partners, the World Bank. There is something called Ushahidi, which I'm going to speak about, iHub and Google. And let me just tell you how it works. Government institutions, private sector organizations, academia, and other experts make available data in data sets to facilitate data sharing. It could be the information can be by email, tweets, and this information can be viewed interactively. And this information from different sectors could relate to education, health, energy, sensors, water, sanitation. It's a whole range of information that is available. This information is updated, and sometimes that could be a challenge, and which I'm going to talk about later. Now, that is ODI. Now, let me go into specific some of the other specific technology-related issues and how we're going to relate to humanitarianism. M-Pesa basically is a mobile phone-based money transfer, and it is arguably one of the most developed mobile payment systems in the world. You can carry out banking facilities using your mobile phone. You can make purchases. You can pay your bills using that. You can basically transfer money to anybody at any particular time, and they can have it in a bank, in a virtual bank within the phone. And it was very helpful during the post-election violence. If you remember, a lot of people were displaced, about 500,000, and it was not easy for people to move from one place to the other. Some of the services were disrupted. It was very difficult to get money to make purchases or to pay for certain services, and therefore it served very well, this M-Pesa, for those who were affected at that particular time. And there's a picture there. You can see the you can make the purchases and everything that you need. Now, why was it important? Because the banking services, as you know, at a certain time, they had not spread throughout the country. Indeed, in the rural areas, there's a lot of difficult issues relating to banking. And right now, there are 19 million mobile phone customers in Kenya, which literally every adult has a mobile phone. So I think the innovative people came up and said, look, maybe we can harness this technology so that we can make good use of it. And the transactions conducted under M-Pesa, it's 31%, that's roughly $40 billion of the country's GDP. That is a big slice of transactions that are conducted through the mobile phone. I will move on to ushahidi. Now, ushahidi is a Swahili word that means witness. Now, ushahidi came to be used for the first time. It's a social application technology application. It came to be used during the post-election violence. And it was used to map out reported outbreaks of violence and communicate events on the ground and information made available online. And the information that, when it's sent out, there could be immediate reactions, and this information is filtered, translated, sorted, categorized, geolocated. And even the source of information itself can be located. And depending on where you are, you could say that you're in a certain area and you're under attack or there is something going on. And all this information will be viewed by security agents, will be viewed by other people, even relatives could know where you are. It was a very important platform. And it is a platform that was used in Haiti during the 2010 earthquake. It is still being used in Somalia right now during the drought. Certainly, as I said, it could be able to locate those who are displaced. You could also locate others your loved ones who you do not know where they are. And this platform was developed by very young people, and sometimes probably we never get to speak about the young people who come up with these innovative ideas when technology is concerned, and how important that information is in application to humanitarianism. So that's the ushahidi. The last one I'm going to talk about is Code for Kenya. Now, this is not a government initiative. This is implemented by the Kenya Media and Open Institute to make open data more relevant to be used by citizens. Now, they develop applications, build data desks, and strengthen capacity. These include like health portals. In those health portals, what you could do, if you go into it, you will know exactly the distribution of health centers and hospitals. You know which specialist is available for what kind of medical problem. Or in schools, for example, you could track and know what school is doing very well, how many children are in a certain school, and it helped us certainly during the election mapping. You could know the voting patterns, and these are done or in real time. I mean, you can actually see as the information is uploaded. And all this information was very important, particularly when you get all the information relating to health, you get the information relating to education, you would know which schools are affected. Information is key, and information is power, and that is the whole reason as to why all these applications are actually coming in. If I may go very quickly to the pros and cons. Now, for all these applications, and we're talking about humanitarianism, increased transparency is certainly very important for people to know exactly what is happening where, how much information, where you need to find something, especially if you're in a crisis. As you've heard the others say, that it is important to locate, especially those who are buried under the rubble. And by the way, the Agenu Shahidi was used when a building collapsed in Nairobi. They could be able to locate the person who actually sent the information out. Increased information can be used to generate new ideas and participation. A lot of people are able to participate and provide their information. So you do not need to be told, for example, by any specific agency what is happening anywhere. You can actually just go online and you would see what is happening in whatever area that you are in, because information is not blocked, is not filtered, it's free for everybody to be able to participate. It gives people power, it's self-empowerment, because you use that information to improve your situation. The availability, therefore, would help you to make a good result, make yourself better. But what are the disadvantages sometimes? It's, to maintain high quality data is very expensive. For example, the Kenya Open Data Initiative, it's a very important portal because it gives information about anything you want to know in government, anything you want to know about hospitals, education, and every ministry. But to be able to maintain those data sets is a very complex and difficult task to be able to perform. And there is always the question of the right of information and ensuring there are certain information that is has to be left to some level of privacy. Sometimes there are those who do not want to give out that information. So the lack of participation in surveys may present skewed results. Others just want to hold that information, and that would present problem. Hold information by key institutions especially. And I could say that indeed there's some reluctance because this is a drive from the head of government, making sure that everybody provides that information. But in terms of implementation, there are some who are not as enthusiastic to provide certain information. The data may be too complex. Some people may not even understand it. And the other challenges, you can see some, like many governments have not digitized their data sets. So therefore it becomes very difficult to be able to upload that information on the Kenya Open Data, that initiative, the portal itself. Information needs constant updating, and we know what happens when something is new. People jump onto it, but after some time updating that information, they become lazy unless you have people who really are dedicated to making sure that the information is up to date and therefore reliable, and you can use it to make decisions. So we need to build capacity among potential users so that they can also know how important that information is, that you can use this information to make yourself better if you want to start a business, if you want to engage yourself in selling your wares or agricultural produce, as it happens in Western Kenya. If you want to know the price of tomatoes nowadays in Western Kenya, for example, you just go on your cell phone, and it will list all the markets in your vicinity and what the prices for the commodities that you want or you're selling are going for, which is really amazing for the farmers in the Western Kenya and now being rolled out. Sometimes in crisis situations, and I think this is important for humanitarian, the information is not forthcoming, so there is a problem with future participation. We have to ensure that the information is not misused. But some academic institutions themselves, because of issues of copyright and stuff like that, they do not want to release the research papers. And lastly, of course, there is the negative and positive. If it's negative information, you do not want it to go out there. But good news, I think, in terms of moving forward, the new government is just being unveiled as we speak in real time. And yesterday, one of the ministers of 18 cabinet ministers is a cabinet secretary for ICT. So basically, information and technology is going to be key for the government that has just been come in. And we obviously have to make sure that we continue to empower people. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Desi. I'm the Chief Innovation Advisor at FEMA. We're going to be a little impromptu here, and we've kind of switched up our presentation on the fly. We've got a couple of key participants in the audience who I think I would love to have come join me after we get this started to kind of have a conversation about what we did here in New York City. So with that, before I get started, I'm a visual illustrator as well. I spend time actually sometimes in Canada with the tribes doing visual illustrations for their storytelling. So sometimes when I get to hear the other speakers, I get to listen to what they're saying and visually illustrate what I start to depict as something that we're all starting to see, a thematic type of pattern. So I don't know if everyone's going to be able to see my picture, and if they're not, I'll get it to the organizers here, and we can certainly spread it out and let people see, but maybe via email. But I did a little visual illustration of the social nodes in the context of what we're talking about in technology. And again, I'm going to try and hold it up so you can see. but the different colors and the different nodes represent different pieces. And one of the things we've all been talking about is technology's lateralized how we do business in disasters. And so in the context of what we do at FEMA and with innovation here when we had Hurricane Sandy hit our shores, a lot of that same lateralizing happened. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who is on our innovation team, along with some folks who represent the Red Hook Initiative here, to have a conversation about what we did and how we sort of lateralize the structure with what can be a very highly bureaucratic organization. So with that, again, thank you for having me here. This is fantastic, and I love the idea of us connecting to the international sphere because we have a lot to learn from you, and in exchange, you might have some things to learn from us as well. As you know, I'm at FEMA, so I'm in the business of disasters. I was just actually at the Boston Marathon because I periodically lecture at Harvard, and although many of us didn't know the incident that was about to occur, we got to respond in real time to that as well. So we're always kind of responding, recovering, looking at things, trying to tweak the way we do business. But two of the most important things that I do want to sort of keep in touch with is the idea of connecting to our HOLA community partners. So that means private industry, that means NGOs, that means universities, that means bringing in everybody in to be a part of this disaster recovery and response. And again, I'm going to kind of highlight that with Sandy. And the second piece is we've got to innovate. And there's a theory out there, and I think we're trying to push it. I know Steve pushed it in Stockholm, that you can innovate in response and recovery. And it isn't just locked to before or after or in an after action somewhere. And sometimes we get stuck. I know you guys are, I'm preaching to the choir, but sometimes there's theories out there that we can't do that. And we actually did it, and we did it in a really, really big way this last October and November. In fact, such a big way that the White House recognized it twice. And in fact, Steve was recognized yesterday, and we had another recognition ceremony in February. So the government's changing, and they're realizing a lot about what we need to do to connect. And again, that's about lateralizing the structures, which we've heard from our past speakers. So with that, just a couple of stats about Hurricane Sandy, and just to show you that it was big business. A lot of you are in New York City, so you know that. But it's going to be about a $50 billion+ disaster. That's big. That could possibly be the second most expensive disaster in American history. So for government leaders to allow an innovation team down to a hurricane, it's one of the largest ones we've had, to do things on the fly with our partners and not just, sequester ourselves off to government, but actually work with others. It's a pretty big, not just accomplishment, it's a big task, right? It's a lot at stake. But basically, whenever, and Rich couldn't make it today, he's the deputy administrator of FEMA, so second in command in our structure. But we kind of joke back and forth because when he decided that we were going to deploy, his one sort of imperative to me or direction was, don't break the law. That's it. That's all. He called, he left that message, he said, don't break the law, that's all I'm asking, Desi. Go out there and do what you need to do. So most people would find that really, really scary. But because you are forward-leaning, as am I forward-leaning, I found it really fascinating. Because what government leader is going to just let you go loose and let your non-governmental partners who are part of your innovation team go and run with this? So we were given kind of a golden opportunity to move pretty quickly and fast. So we ended up deploying on November 5th. But I do want to track you to how this all began too, just real quickly. And this is something that's kind of important because it gives you an idea of how fast we put this together. When I started, which was in September, a month before that, I got called down to DC, and Rich Serino, along with this guy named Lenny Marcus from the National Preparedness Leadership Institute at Harvard, said, we're going to put together a deployed innovation team, and you are going to deploy it in the next disaster. And at the time, it hadn't completely sunk in that we would actually be doing this in November. And that's actually how it happened. And then in September, I met some folks at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. They came on board. We started to build this team. So this happened really quick. And so again, back to the argument that you can't innovate in response and recovery, we didn't have a whole lot in place. We were doing this on the fly at times, but we did some pretty incredible things just because we did have that leverage to do it. So my argument is if we can do it here nationally in the United States, I think we could take some of those principles and do it internationally. So with that, I'm just going to give you a couple of things that were within not breaking the law that we did. There's many, and I'd be happy to share the podcast if anybody wanted to listen to the White House call. But one of the things that Steve's going to talk about is working with our private industry and getting communications infrastructure up. We put up mesh networks in Red Hook. And really, we shouldn't say we did, as in Red Hook Initiative did, and we were a part of that facilitation. And they really took it off and ran with it. So I'm going to leave that one to Steve, and I'm going to leave that to the Red Hook Initiative to chat about that. But that was a pretty cool thing because we, as a government, decided also that we were going to use that mesh network to help power our disaster recovery centers, which is where the disaster survivor goes to get resources. So kind of a cool switch in dynamics, government relying on their whole community partners. Second thing we did was we did these roving disaster recovery centers. Rich said, don't break the law, but how do we get to disaster survivors faster? It's a mobile society, let's be mobile. Why can't we as FEMA be mobile? So we literally handed out iPads to FEMA Corps members who had this is their first disaster, they're fresh, they're figuring it out, and they went and they deployed to the neighborhoods and they actually registered people online at their homes. That's never been done before by us. How cool is that? And again, we didn't have this planned ahead of time. Another really cool example is we worked with UNICEF and Frog Design, and we looked at rethinking, redesigning the physical spot of our disaster recovery centers. The Federal Coordinating Officer of New York said, hey, I want to be able to register people faster, and I want them to leave with smiles on their faces. Make it happen. And so we're in the process right now of completely redesigning how somebody experiences a recovery center. In fact, next week in California, we're going to be meeting with Naval Postgraduate and Department of Defense and a couple other great players. And we're going to go out and do field experimentations and run people through the new physical layout to see if it works. So just really cool things happening for us. Another thing, we talk about data mining and how important it is to take the social media piece and make sure that we're on top of the cutting edge. A lot of what I did was actually something that I sort of got in trouble for, but I think it was for the better, for the better, greater good, and I didn't mind a slap on the wrist for it. We reached out to Canadians, to Splunk, to a couple other social media folks and the community members, and we had them aggregating tweets for us and Foursquare locations so that we could get a big picture of what's going on with the innovation team. And that helped us when we were deploying the team out to different locations, where they needed to go and how we were going to work this. Again, we looked at that picture I drew. It's lateralizing the structure. It's creating a bunch of social nodes that work together. It's that whole community concept. So I know we have short time, and I do want to get to some other folks that are on my panel, apparently. But I also wanted to just kind of highlight what we learned from this. So there's many more great examples, and I'd be happy to share with you all of the ones we're doing, including the week-long hackathon we're in the midst of with engineering students at UVA who are taking raw data at FEMA and catalyzing it and analyzing it for us. But the things we're learning right now is we have to change the way we do business. We do business in disasters, and there's a voice amplifier now at local levels. We're going to have to start listening, and we're going to have to listen in a big way. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to do improvisation, but we need to critically think about our processes and how we're working with our community members. So one of the things that's coming out, and I'm kind of excited to talk about this because it's gone out agency-wide now, is there's usually 2 or 3 big imperatives that the agency puts up for 4 or 5 years. So from 2015 to 2019, the 2 big imperatives that Administrator Fugates put out agency-wide that we're going to follow is 1, whole community, and 2, innovating as an organization. So we are going to continue to innovate. We're going to continue to work with our innovation or our community partners. And with that, I would love to give a case example of how we did that. Steve.
Sure, thanks. So when we got out to New York, where are we? Okay. Thanks. So first of all, those evil horns you see coming out of my head, I wear 2 hats. I'm a member of the innovation team. I'm also with industry. So when Desi talks about the ability to collaborate in a disaster, it is absolutely possible. Industry really does want to come forward and does want to help. And it can be such a force multiplier when you collaborate with your other partners in the middle of a disaster, rather than excluding them. So some of the stuff we did, FEMA set up one of their disaster recovery centers in an IKEA in Red Hook. Oh, okay. Inside the store. And we went and we said, well, hang on. We've got network connectivity here. So let's ask the store if we can use their internet. So we borrowed their internet. One of our partners came in and set up a bunch of PC computers so that people could register themselves online for FEMA assistance. And then we worked with the Red Hook initiative. We brought in some other partners, Project Byzantium, and they went loose and created a whole mesh Wi-Fi network throughout the whole community. And by doing that, not only could the community members access information, but they could start to tell people what they needed. Then we went into the Rockaway area, where it's very, very badly hit, huge impact, a lot of damage, no power, no communications. And there was a local community center that was trying to set up their own distribution network. But one of their biggest challenges was they couldn't communicate with the outside world. They couldn't find out what was going on. They couldn't articulate their needs, and they couldn't bring in the resources that they needed. They could barely get a cell phone signal to make a phone call. So we helped them out. We brought in some of our partners, some corporate, some NGOs. We set up high-speed satellite-based network with Wi-Fi, with voice-over IP phones, and that's all it really took. A small little satellite dish, and it turned this into an office. They had laptops, they had printers, they had voice lines, the phones were ringing off the hook. They were running off solar-powered energy, fully sustainable. And the cool thing is, instead of having to figure out, so how does the government get food and water and all these really expensive things in to help them, all we had to do was help them connect, help them communicate. So when you look at the international sphere, aid has always traditionally been, how do we get this really big, heavy stuff out to all these people because we assume that everyone needs it. But maybe if we think about it, if we can simply give communication, ICT, as aid, as was said earlier, it's really all about people. If we can let people communicate, they can start articulating their own needs and they can start looking after themselves in a lot of areas. Perhaps even reducing the need for the big forklift packages that today go out. Some of the other cool innovations that are happening, OpenStreetMaps, working with the US government to buy high resolution satellite imagery in 48 hours, mapped out the Dolado camp better than it's ever been mapped before. So it's a great example of using government resources of funding combined with the online community. Next up, we're taking this forward. We're trying to create ideas for crowdsourcing a map of mobile network coverage so that after a disaster, people can understand where they can go for coverage or where the holes are. So if we're providing ICT as aid to help these communities, we can figure out where we need to go with them. So I realize we're a little bit late, so I'll keep it short. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. There's a lot of very interesting and profound things that I want to say to you about the use of technology during humanitarian response. I'm not going to say any of them today. Because I think, to quote Star Wars, Luke, turn off the computer. We have a big issue here to discuss. And it's not about technology per se, but it's all about technology at the same time. And I'm going to get to that with my notes here. But first, open up your reports to page 7, the reason why we're all here today. And let's have a moment where we read aloud the key contribution of this report, which are these 4 primary adaptations that the authors propose. 1, to recognize information as a basic need in humanitarian response. 2, to ensure information relevant to humanitarian action is shared freely. 3, to build capacity within aid organizations and governments to understand and use new information sources. And 4, to develop guidelines to ensure information is used in an ethical and secure manner. If anything comes out of this report, the fact that OCHA said that today, those 4 things, is extremely important. So I'm sure you've been to a lot of panel discussions and presentations, but look around. You're at an important moment because this is the first time that we have made significant progress as the international community to make the big pivot on what's fundamentally not a technology issue. It's a human rights one. And to go back to the presentation that started us off today, there is a big debate about whether the right to information during a disaster, or I just showed all my cards there, sorry, about whether information during disaster and access to it and the ability to use it is a human right. I believe it is. And whether or not you do, we need to talk about it. Because these 4 adaptations cannot happen, I contend, if we don't answer that question. Because right now, we are very excited about technology. To quote Elizabeth Bishop, the American poet, bright objects hypnotize the mind. We are running around and we are making lots of innovations. Some are very good ones, some don't really do anything, some do bad things. But we are doing this innovation cycle and frenzy without a rights-based approach. We're doing it without a framework. And so what we have here in these 4 adaptations is the invitation to the next step, I believe. And that next step, and all I want to communicate today, is just 2 things. One, that I believe within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in Articles 3, 12, 19, and a part of 27, that taken together, there is the implicit DNA that individual human beings have a right to connectivity during emergencies. That this is the second part. Conversely, thus like the right to health in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, governments have a corresponding responsibility to engage in actions to realize that right to information during disasters. That's a big deal. Because, like we now have a responsibility to protect doctrine, which says that sovereignty is not a right, it's a responsibility. I would turn that back around and say connectivity is actually a right, and it is a responsibility for governments, private corporations, NGOs, and communities. And out of that right and the responsibility to realize it that certain actors have, I believe there is an O2WI, an obligation to warn and inform. In this era that we are in now, R2P, the responsibility to protect, the Red Cross NGO Code of Conduct, sphere standards are not enough doctrinally for where we are now. We have new technology, but we got the new technology before we got doctrine, training, theory, and before we identified what human rights are in play. So I just want to channel a departed former UN official, Jonathan Mann. Do any of you know who Jonathan Mann is? Can we see some hands? Well, you got one guy in the back. Yeah. Jonathan Mann was an American physician and the founder of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at the Harvard School of Public Health. And he said 3 critical things about the right to health included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He said that health is a human rights issue. Human rights is a health issue. And the third is that linkages exist between access to health care and the human rights status of populations. I want to apply that framework today in context to these 4 recommended adaptations and how we get there. Information and access to information communication technologies during disasters is a human rights issue. Second, the human rights status of populations and how they are made vulnerable and affected by disasters is an information and communication technology issue. And the third is that linkages do exist between the access in the capacity of populations to use ICT and to be reached with ICT and their human rights status. This has massive implications for everyone in this space because it says that private corporations, governments, and rules of classification, NGOs in terms of experimental deployments, NGOs in terms of advocacy initiatives, that there is a human rights framework. But one last point here, going to what I think is the critical recommendation of this report, to recognize information is a basic need in humanitarian response. Okay, there's a converse of that we also need to talk about, which is if information is a basic need in humanitarian response, what makes the collection and communication of information during humanitarian response or during disaster, let's put it that way, during disaster, what makes that collection and communication act humanitarian? What's the difference? What makes Google or the folks at IKEA or Oxfam or UN? Is it the person doing it, using technology for humanitarian purposes that makes it humanitarian? Well, I want to suggest a metric for assessing whether the use of information or information technology during disasters is a humanitarian act. And whether it is not decided by the person doing it. That's the key takeaway here. You don't get to decide whether your information communication technology act by yourself, without doctrine and evidence, has human rights implications, is humanitarian, or has human security implications. We need a metric for measuring that. So here in closing is a suggested metric. It's based on the perceived actionability of or uniqueness, otherwise unattainable uniqueness of the information being collected and communicated. What I'm saying is it's not about whether it tells us something that helps us in humanitarian response. It's about whether an affected population thinks it's actionable and is making decisions or could make decisions based on it. Then you are engaged in a humanitarian act, potentially. Or bad actors think you are producing actionable information that helps them make decisions in a timely way. Then we need humanitarian standards for those actions. And just to close out here before the gong sounds twice, the core issue is that right now we are looking at this as a brave new world. In some ways it is. In some ways, it is new opportunities and new problems. In some ways, it's old problems, but now they're on anabolic steroids. They are faster, they are more potentially deadly, and we understand them very, very little. So the takeaway here is that we're not answering any questions today. I'm not giving the secret to how we deal with these problems. But I'm saying that we have to respond to them. It is probably the most crucial human rights and humanitarian issue of our time. And regardless of what the answer is, we have to see that how we address the question and how OCHA helped us today to start addressing the question is crucial for what type of world we are going to live in. Thank you.
My name is Dirk Sieger. I'm the head of communications at OCHA. I just want to connect the two sort of big trends that were mentioned. One, the rapid proliferation of connectivity at a global scale, as well as the rapid rises in the use of mobile cash transactions, and the example that Mr. Mazzoti gave of this huge scale in Kenya already. I just wonder, I mean, if you combine those two, you can see, and this was also mentioned very briefly, how it can revolutionize humanitarian assistance worldwide, that you don't need huge logistical transactions anymore. You don't need to ship. It could potentially revolutionize the way we provide humanitarian assistance on a worldwide basis. I just wonder, for any of the panel members, I mean, how realistic is this that this really will change the way we do things, and also in terms of timescale. I always feel we underestimate the timescale of these things. These things can actually go extremely rapidly. So I just wonder whether you'd like to do some sort of blue sky predictions on that.
Thank you. I would take a couple of questions before getting back to the panel.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Maria O'Reilly from IPI. Just regarding point 2 and point 4 there on page 7, to ensure information is shared freely and to develop guidelines to ensure it is used in an ethical and secure manner. I wonder if any of you could speak to existing experiences with the private sector on both of these points and how we can actually start pushing the agenda forward in terms of developing these kinds of guidelines in a way that can bring the private sector on board, especially given how much of the information the private sector itself holds.
Thank you. So I'm going to add a couple of questions that I'm receiving through Twitter. One question which came up during the presentation, the first presentation, the second presentation, Anawi, is what happens when local authorities pose problems or create obstacles to communication? How do we react to that? And this is from Laura Egoli from New York. Should we go in reverse order, maybe? And you can address the question you wish. Please.
I want to address the question raised about points 2 and 4 in the recommendations, and also talk about it as the question asker suggested in the context of private sector with some specific examples. To ensure information relevant to humanitarian action is shared freely. That one really hits close to home. As someone who works with satellite imagery with my team up at HHI, at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, we are constantly dealing with the fact that we don't have our own satellite and that private corporations have access to unique and transformative information, communication, and data collection resources. Now, we do have some frameworks for applying them to disasters. In the case of satellites, we have what's called the Charter, which allows satellites to be used by affected nations during disaster and has been used very effectively with Standby Task Force and other voluntary technical organizations to create situational awareness during emergencies. But we do not have a holistic policy on how to ensure that all available data is not only shared, but is collected in the first place, okay? In the case of satellite imagery in particular, we are losing evidence of war crimes every single day because there is no economic reason to often collect these areas. So we could catch perpetrators in the act all the time of gross human rights abuses to a greater degree than we can now, but there isn't an economic incentive or a structure for ensuring that. So I think in the last point here, to develop guidelines to ensure information is used in an ethical and secure manner, we're in a situation right now where there are some efforts to create comprehensive ethical guidelines for crisis mapping that myself, Patrick Meyer, and others here today are involved in. At this point, it has not become, I think, the priority for funders. Any foundations listening, that it needs to be to have sphere standards like we do in ground response and humanitarian action for crisis mapping. I think, so two big needs to get there on these. One, we need private corporations to understand they do have a responsibility that relates to human rights about evidence and data collection. Second is that we need to prioritize either integrating or a separate standalone code of ethics for crisis mapping similar to Sphere.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to address, I have to press, I'm going to be addressing the blue sky piece of infrastructure and comms and maybe taking a spin on it, because I like to do that, as well as also addressing the private sector piece, because I think it's really, really important to make sure we talk about some actual real case examples of that. I have many, but let's just go to blue sky real quick. If I had it my way, all information would be freed, to be quite honest with you. If we have citizens going out and tweeting and doing Facebook and sending messages out about what's going on in their communities, why can't government do the same thing, right? Can't we have that two-way? And we are we're taking a baby step right now. When I talked about that week-long hackathon where Open FEMA's taking raw data that we have from past disasters and allowing these engineer students to mine it and come up with predictive analysis models, actually for our innovation team, so that we can be a little more proactive next time rather than having to react to response recovery. But I would also argue that we need to do it real time. And I had mentioned real quickly when we were having our presentations that I would love to take the raw data that we get as the disaster's happening and find a way to feed that out. And that can be our sort of mechanism of getting out what's going on in the landscape to our communities. Because if they're going to empower us to know what's going on with them, we should also empower them with information on what's going on with what we're seeing. And together we can marry those concepts and maybe come up with something really, really cool and have a faster response. So that's blue sky, but I don't think it's so blue sky that it can't happen in a very, very short amount of time. Just need to get all of the lawyers on board and all policymakers to say thumbs up to that. But again, it goes with the open directive of Obama. So I think there's a high chance that'll happen really quick. But back to the private sector piece, we did cover that. And I'm not going to go into the comms piece. I'm actually going to go into how we took social media and we aggregated that information and mined it. We worked with a couple of groups, including Splunk, actually some organizations like Geeks Without Bounds, you name it, bunch of different groups. But the private sector is hungry to be involved in response and recovery efforts. They want a role. They just need to know how to plug in. And so what we were finding is people were saying, how can we leverage? How can we be of most assistance? What's the way we can work? And one of the ways that we did see a great success was when we had Splunk working to show us public sentiment. We started to see rumor control and issues that we needed to address right away, to either tell people about surge capacities in certain geographical regions or to tell people about what was going on in the grounds of Rockaway. But those are all things that, using our private sector partners, we were able to see the ebbs and flows. And then through that, we still work with them to this day. They're willing to give their time and do this pro bono. So it is happening, and it's happening in a big way. And I just think that internationally or nationally, we need to harness our private sector partners. And I think Steve is like on the edge of his seat. Steve, did you have one thing you wanted to add about the comms? Yeah, just quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to. There we go. 2 weeks ago, a number of us were meeting in Sweden at the Working Group for Emergency Telecommunications. And one of the very telling moments, we had a room probably 60, 70% private sector. Question was asked, how many of you represent companies, private sector companies, that have formal partnerships with the UN? 2 people put up their hands. I think in the international sphere, and I think I heard it a little bit from what you were saying, the relationship is vendor. Give me something for free. Give me your product for free. That's not a partnership. A partnership is 2 people putting down their guards, working together for a single goal. So it's sharing the challenge, not coming with a shopping list, not asking all the time for something for free, because I represent, I chair humanitarian programs for the Global Satellite Industry Association, the GVF. We get a lot of questions. Give me this for free. Give me this for free. Give me this for free. The question is not, what can I give you for free? The question is, how can I help you solve your problem? What's your challenge? What are you facing? That's a real partnership. And I think we need to get past this hurdle of having this wall between industry where they're seen as vendors and the humanitarian, because we are all in this together.
John.
Thank you very much for that question. I think if we go back to 2010, 2011, during the hunger, what happened is that indeed in the country, it was perceived that there are certain areas that had food and others didn't have. And yet what other humanitarians and TV images were showing was that this food needed to come from somewhere else. And yet all these people could have networked and known exactly where food is available, and then would have transported that food to where it is needed. That is one level. So that would have cut costs for a humanitarian community, because then, even for the government, because then it wouldn't have been necessary to get the food from out of the country if they had just looked around, because that information was available, the food was available. Logistically, they would also have cut down on the logistics. But secondly, is what people needed, because sometimes what happens is that humanitarians don't give people what they need, they give them what is available, and the people don't need that. So what is happening is that when all this information is coming in, they say we specifically need corn, or we need rice, or we need vegetable, we need oil, we need kerosene or something. Then therefore we know better what to deliver, so that we do not have to deliver things that are not needed. And I think that is a very important issue. And insofar as the affected populations is able to communicate exactly what they need, and they are able to communicate exactly where they are, we know who they are, we know where they are, then we could certainly, be much better, much more efficient, and certainly cut costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anai?
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got like the tricky question, right? What happens when local authorities pose this problem to communication? Well, there's two things here. One is that we have to stop thinking that communication happens because we enable it. Communication is happening anyway. People communicate with each other with whatever type of tool they can find. And I think I've seen almost all of them, but there's always new ones. And that's one thing. The second one is that, again, people will communicate no matter what. So if the government is trying to stop communication, communication will happen anyway. And I'm not going to go into details, but I think that if we look, for example, at a very current fact, like what is happening in Syria, we can see that for as much as the government is trying to do its best to make information not coming out and sometimes not coming in, this is still happening.
Thank you.
Regarding the first question about the partnership potentially with the private sector, I want to give an example of the conversation that I had with some of the researchers who actually were explaining to us that they were getting a lot of data from the phone providers and the mobile companies about the movements of populations. And I think this was the case in Haiti and a number of other places, how population group is moving from one place to another place, and therefore we can track how many refugees we have in certain locations, or how, for instance, even the health disease of cholera is actually moving from one place to another. This kind of information is crucial, and actually I think one of the panelists showed this slide says information saves lives, and I think that's actually absolutely true. Information can save lives, and some of this information, critical data, actually is kept by the private partners. And I think there is a recognition from the UN side now through this study and through the conversations that we had in Sweden some time back, that actually the partnership and the mutual partnership between the private sector and the UN is becoming much more critical. And how do we ensure that there's a coordination within the private sector in such a way that the information in a coherent fashion is shared with us in a way that we can also help save lives better and more effectively and more efficiently, and also use the information as part of our preparedness. And the second thing is that I think there's also growing recognition that we have to work much more closely in research. So for instance, I think a lot of the private companies have this kind of data that actually shows the patterns and the behavior of people in crisis. So for instance, as an example, during the crisis in the first few days, do they use telephones or do they use text? Do they call or do they actually SMS? This kind of information can be quite critical for the people who are working in the humanitarian setting. And so we are trying to engage more with the private companies in such a way that we can do joint research partnerships. And lastly, about the government's role and the handling of the information or the blockages and whatnot, I think there is a growing recognition that inevitably we are going in one track which is open data. And it's a matter of time, I think. So information is going to be out there whether we like it or not, and whether somebody blocks it or not. And I think the question then is, how do we know what is secure information? And I think that I tried to say this in our presentation, and what is reliable information, and also what is open information that needs to be shared widely. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me try maybe to take another question from the floor, and then I have a couple coming through Twitter. Please.
Thanks. My name is My name is Shiran from the Algerian mission to the UN. First, I want to thank all the speakers for their comprehensive presentations, and my question is for the last speaker. I wanted to ask a question with regard this ongoing debate from the rise of the shift from the needs-based approach to the rights-based approach. And then we can put it within the framework of the way of providing humanitarian assistance, or within the framework of sharing information. My question is as follows: do this trend in terms of shift paradigm from needs-based approach to rights-based approach, does it challenge the traditional humanitarian principles contained in Resolution 46/1A2? And I mean, does it take us to the politicizations of the way providing humanitarian assistance? Thank you.
Thank you. If it's a short question, I take it with pleasure. Please.
Hi, I want to echo that. I'm Imogen from OCHA. In a previous life, I ran a radio project in Sudan for 2 years in Darfur. If I had presented my project to the Sudanese government as delivering information as a right and as a freedom of access to information, they'd have shut us down and thrown us out of the country. In that context, and when you work at country level, do we need to think about the fact that actually the language of rights can be very unhelpful, and the language of need is a much easier way to negotiate with national governments? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just add two short questions. One, I think, is in some way already been addressed from Amanda Sperber. Is communication a right or a need? And the second one goes to what we were saying at the end of her intervention now. Crowdsourced data produced wrong suspects in Boston bombing. Has that impacted the truthful result from crowdsourcing? Could it have an impact translated to other fields? And it is coming from Jill Stoddard, who actually works here at IPI. Since there is a direct question to you, Nathaniel, maybe you want to start, and then we'll ask who wants to take the others. Please.
Sure. I want to address your question first, sir, and also speak a little bit to what my colleague Steve from FEMA was saying. I want to say up front that the work I do and my team and I do every day relies on private sector partnerships. Private sector partnerships are necessary and transformative. In the case of what we do with Digital Globe, it's been crucial to be able to conduct our research, and I'm grateful. That said, in response to your question, we are at a point, and we have to acknowledge this, where traditional delineations of civil-military space and public-private space as it relates to humanitarian response are being very quickly, and in some cases, transfiguratively blurred. We are working with private corporations that, while committed to this work and are crucial to this work, have agendas that are about making a profit. And that is okay for them to have. But as humanitarians, in an operational context, we do have responsibilities that are separate from that agenda. In the case of civil military space, using assets that are also used by governments, which governments have shutter control over in the case of satellites, cell networks, which governments can shut on and off, Twitter and social media streams, which governments can interdict, information that they can use to target individuals as much as to coordinate. These are very much human rights issues at a core level, and they are issues of civil military space and public-private space. That doesn't mean that we should be scared of private sector. It doesn't mean we should be scared of governments. At the same time, we must not throw the baby of our hard-earned Geneva values out with the bathwater of new technology. We have to find ways to apply these values to this new era, but we should not start from scratch. And there are some critical aspects of the Red Cross NGO Code of Conduct in terms of neutrality and impartiality, which we need to figure out how to apply here. Now, I would be yakking your ear off all afternoon if I tried to do that. I'm saying that we need an agreed forum and a process and to prioritize that. The Red Cross NGO Code of Conduct is as relevant today as it was 10 years ago. That said, it needs to evolve. And just one last point to the question of rights versus need. Yes, as someone who has been denounced several times by, in my organization by President Bashir in terms of the work we did with the Satellite Sentinel project, Sudan would not be responsive to a rights over a need language for operational actors on the ground. As someone who's been an operational actor on the Horn of Africa, words matter. These semantics directly affect access, and they directly affect delivery, and thus directly affect lives. That said, be that as the case, we must be aspirational here. Because if we are not aspirational, the concrete will harden fast, and the space to protect those aspirational values in the UDHR in this sector will disappear.
Thank you, Nadine. Dizzy, you want to address one of the questions?
Sure, thank you. One of the questions from the Twitter account was dealing with inaccurate information coming through crowdsourcing. It's open source, it's candid, it's raw. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes what we say isn't right or wrong either. Sometimes media gets things wrong. Government sometimes states things that aren't true. This happens. So my argument is, let's get the information. Let's understand it. Let's be comfortable with the fact that we have to critically analyze it ourselves. I'll give you a Sandy example. We had a lot of tweets come through that we had to run to ground truth to find out whether it was accurate or not. We didn't just necessarily take the tweet and say, okay, well, let's deploy tons of resources towards this specific area until we check it out. We would send innovation team members down to take a look and see if it was true. Some ended up not being accurate, some did, but the ones that were, it was very important and it was essential that we met those needs. So I guess from my perspective, from just forward leaning, I don't think that takes away from the importance of going towards crowdsourcing, to looking towards other metrics of people and what they're communicating towards us. It's just a matter of critically analyzing it, thinking about it, trying to be one step ahead and understanding what's going on, and you can do that sometimes with some of the predictive analysis models you have in place. But most importantly, we just can't fear the unknown. We just have to embrace it and try to see and understand it, because there's always the fog of war and disaster.
Thank you. John, do you have?
Oh, I just wanted to add something about this, which is the fact that Hans Rosling, I think he was actually here at the UN when he said there's no such a thing as bad data or good data. There's people that are able to use it and people that are not. So I've actually been looking a lot at what was happening during the Boston bombing and looking at how social media were reacting. If a journalist is crowdsourcing data and then posting the wrong information, I'm sorry, the problem it's not the data. The problem is the journalist that it's not able to do his work. So, and that's one of the things that I actually always point out, which is that verification of sources, it's something that journalists have been doing for years. That's the core of being a journalist. You get data, I mean, they were doing crowdsourcing without technology. You go around and you listen to people's stories. And then your work is to verify it and make sure that the story is really true. That's the job of a journalist. We have been doing it for 100 years, maybe more. So one of the things that the humanitarian world can actually do is to learn from these people. Maybe not learn from the same one that were involved in Boston, that's what I suggest, but learn from a lot of others that know how to do this. The BBC User-Generated Content Hub is doing amazing work in this sense. Storyful, group of journalists that take information from online sources and verify bits by bits. Like it is possible. It's not impossible. Data can tell you whatever you want. It's about how you use it and how able you are to actually filter the data and make sure that you do, your work in verifying it.
Thank you. And very appropriately, I leave the last word to Gui from, since we are talking about an OCHA report. So if you also want to say a few concluding words. Thank you.
I'm really pleased to see that this report has provoked debate as to whether or not information or data is a basic need or right. I think it's a good debate to have and continue. So we hope that you will continue to discuss this. However, we do not want to fundamentally question the principles that we have, the 46-182, humanity, impartiality, independence, and neutrality. I think we want to have information and data because fundamentally and ultimately, it is supposed to help save lives of people and to support and aid people in need. We want to do our job effectively, and the information is a crucial part of it. And we have actually done this report with a view that technology is, as a key enabler, is actually changing the way in which we communicate so fast, beyond, in some ways, our imagination. And that it is very important that the humanitarian community as a whole needs to rethink about the way in which we work and obviously the way in which we process information. That also means that fundamentally, like before, where we were asking private sector to actually donate or to actually freely share something, it's actually becoming a more of a mutual and a good partnership that we need to move forward in a way that we fundamentally need to change the nature of the relationship, because we both play very critical roles. So I think that what we want to do with this report is to reaffirm what we do, and the principles remain. And obviously, we need to adapt. We need to understand the evolving context or the landscape in which we surround ourselves with is changing, and that recognition is very important. And obviously, with this report being launched, we want to come up with concrete action plans, and I think that this is a very good basis for us to be able to move forward, and we will reflect, and we will hopefully be able to come back to you individually or as a team to be able to actually kind of build continuously some of these partnerships in such a way we can do joint research, joint actions, and further information sharing. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Apologies for going a little bit over the time. I thought it was a very interesting conversation, and my Twitter feeds keep coming in, so I apologize for those on the other side of the screen for not being able to address those questions. This is a topic on which IPI would like to continue to focus not only on the humanitarian spheres, but also on the conflict prevention and peace building. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for all our panelists. Thank you very much, and congratulations to OCHA for an excellent report.